industry's tobacco moment, because the LIBOR rate is tied to over $500 trillion in securities around the world. And all of those people now have cause to sue the banks and the central banks and Timothy Geithner and Mervyn King and everybody else involved. And it's going to be an astronomically large sum of money that is going to fundamentally change the banks. And what will happen, Alex, is that the banks, as they're being sued because of the LIBOR scandal, will have to disclose, finally, some transparency on their books. So we'll find out that JP Morgan is, in fact, insolvent by a factor of 10 times their current market capitalization. Societe Generale in France is insolvent. BNP in France is insolvent. Deutsche Bank, which has 60 to 1 leverage on its balance sheet, is insolvent by a factor of 20 or 30 times its current market capitalization. And as this information filters its way through the system, these banks will implode, and this will be the coup de grace of this huge scandal. If you thought that the Facebook IPO dropping 50% after 2 or 3 weeks, which is something, by the way, I said on my show, I said it was an absolute dead certainty, but the Facebook stock would drop by a minimum of 50% within 3 months of the IPO. And that's exactly what happened, because that is a hologram of fraud, a Ponzi scheme with no business model. These banks, similarly...
Hold on, let me stop you. It's now come out that they've got bots 80% overcharging the clicks. I mean, it's now come out that Nielsen is a fraud. Of course, everything's a fraud. It's all fraud.
Well, that's right. Bots are creating the illusion of commercial activity. That means that the whole Facebook business model is a fraud. But these same bots are at work on the New York Stock Exchange. Just this morning, Alex, we had a huge New York Stock Exchange flash, crash, and then recovery event tied to a company called Knight Ridder, who's a market maker. And they now are involved in a massive investigation for algorithmic rigging of the stock market, and they do this in order to squeeze a few pennies of profits out on top of the massive profits they already make, but they end up fundamentally putting at risk the structure of the exchange itself. So it won't be long now before the exchange just collapses under the weight of its own algorithmic fraud, and this, of course, sets in motion a chain reaction amongst other exchanges and banks around the world. So nobody has done anything. Remember the May of 2010 flash crash? Nobody did anything to put any safeguards in place to stop the exact same thing from happening again.
And the derivatives have gotten worse. All the and as things prepare to implode, they only engage in more reckless stealing. So we're talking about a biblical level collapse here.
Well, the derivative situation has gotten worse for 2 reasons. Number one, the total amount of outstanding derivatives has gone up. But the underlying economy that supports the derivatives has gotten smaller, because all of the 20 G20 nations around the world are in contraction. If you want to really look at it with a gross domestic product number that adequately reflects true inflation numbers, they're all in contraction. So the derivative problem is being magnified by the fact that not only are the number of contracts rising, but the economic activity that is the underlying collateral for that activity is shrinking. So you have the austerity measures in Europe, the austerity measures in the UK are causing tax receipts to plummet, which are causing the ability for government to fund itself to drop, which means they go more into the derivative market to help fake their way through the crisis, which of course creates this dynamic of rising fake derivative manipulated nonsense on top of an ever shrinking collateral pool. Those two things get to a point where they're completely unsustainable. And the LIBOR scandal, I believe, will be the wedge that is the final wedge to create this chasm that you drop, like Iceland, into the abyss of global currency collapse.
And Max Keiser, what is the time frame, your best guess, dead reckoning estimation on the LIBOR scandal destroying what confidence is left in the giant Ponzi scheme operation? 20
minutes. No, I'm like it. No, it's Alex. The time is, I would, we're in the second half of 2012. Clearly what's happening in Europe is the banks are incapable of stemming the tide of collapse that is now sweeping through the European banking system. And their solution will be to create another 10 to 15 million euros in money printing to help bail out these banks. That will probably be commensurate on the timing of this, where it's always difficult to make a prediction on a timing, but I've been pretty good in it on that in the past. So I will say that within the next 9 months, we will have an event that will make 2008 collapse seem minor by comparison.
I want to come back and talk about how the establishment will respond, what new power grab they're going to ask for to fix the crisis they created. And I want to tie this into war. I mean, they're not going to implode something like this without having a big war to get us to all rally around the crooks. So I want to get Max Keiser's take on the Ayatollah over in Iran saying war in 2 weeks and a lot more. Ladies and gentlemen, we've all got front row seats to Armageddon. Commitments.
Deadlines and commitments.
All right, we are back live. Thank you so much for joining us. The globalists are running against the wind of history that tyrants will fall. They think all their high-tech gadgetry is going to protect them. They got another thing coming. They've tried to wreck the U.S. culture. All they've done is wreck people they can wreck. Those of us that are resistant or immune to their brainwashing, it's only served to aggravate us. That which does not kill us only makes us stronger. Max Keiser at maxkeiser.com, financial TV, radio host, former stockbroker, financial expert. So now suddenly it's not Max Keiser 5 years ago or Alex Jones or Paul Craig Roberts or Bob Chapman or countless others breaking down what was coming, the mathematical facts. Now it's Larry Summers. All of them are like, there's a total catastrophe coming. The only answer is give us total power over your lives. So now they've shifted from, oh, yeah, we never really left the recession, as if we need them to tell us that, to total destruction, except for advertisements they put on about how things are getting better, invest in the stock market today. It's being pumped up artificially by the plunge protection team. So how do they plan on getting out of this without going to jail like Bernie Madoff when they've committed crimes? How much bigger are the top banks' crimes in the aggregate compared to Bernie Madoff? What, hundreds of times bigger, Max Keiser?
It's funny you say about putting these white-collar criminals into prison. And, of course, the prisons in America are privatized. They're owned by private corporations. And many of them, like Corrections Corps of America, are listed on the stock exchange. I can imagine, Alex, if you put a group of stockbrokers and brokers in one of these jails, they will free themselves by organizing a leveraged buyout of the jail, taking the jail private, releasing themselves, and then selling the jail once again to the public and making profit in the spread. In other words, the economy is so infiltrated with financialization and white-collar crooks, Wall Street crooks, and all the GDP, all the activity is tied to trading in some way, and all the trading is totally corrupt. You can't really take the corruption out of the system at this point because there's really nothing else but corruption. So it's like a car that is 80% rusted out. If you took the rust away, there would be no car at all. If you took corruption away, financial Wall Street corruption away from the American and the British economy, there would be literally nothing left. So these guys have figured out a way to imbue themselves into the system, to really attach themselves to the system like a parasite, and they are really hardwired into the system. And I thought what might be interesting, Alex, is that a lot of people are curious about market manipulation. We've been talking about it on your show for years, and now that people understand that these markets are being manipulated, it might be interesting for people to understand a little bit more about how to actually manipulate the price on one of these exchanges. Because I used to do it myself when I was working on Wall Street, and it's the same technique, except now they use high-frequency trading and algorithmic trading. But the technique is basically the same. And it involves what are called wash trades. And the way this works, Alex, is that if a stock is trading at $100 a share and you're trying to manipulate the price to 101 or 102, you simultaneously put on a buy and sell order at 101 or 102. So the ticker tape, when it goes across, it'll show a transaction at that higher price. But that transaction actually didn't cost her anything because it was simultaneously buy and sell. It was a wash trade. This is illegal, but it's done now with high-frequency trading and algorithmic trading billions of times a day. This morning, the fraud on the New York Stock Exchange involved hundreds of millions of transactions in the space of less than an hour. So there's no way to actually the authorities to step in there and to stop it, because the high-frequency traders, Alex, believe it or not, they're only constrained with their computer technology by the speed of light. That's how fast these traders are going now. They are doing trades in billionths of a second. And so obviously the law enforcement can't possibly keep up with this. But essentially that's the way they manipulate prices up or down. Now, if you have a stock like IBM and you are manipulating the price, let's say from 100 to 101, 102, and if you simultaneously put an option trade on one of the various options exchanges, knowing that there's going to be a price differential coming either up or down, you simply put on that trade on the New York Stock Exchange, move the price up or down by a few percentage points, and immediately book your profits in the option market. And this is what we did all the time on Wall Street, and variations on this theme. But it's very rare to find trading these days that is just people coming together and buying and selling in a traditional
Exactly.
fashion.
It's all a giant matrix-like fraud absorbing the real world. And the bankers are so hungry, they're now taking houses they don't even own.
We're on the march. The empires.
Max Keiser of MaxKeiser.com is our guest. I'm Alex Jones, and this isn't a game. I could sit here and go over 100 different articles where different world leaders, a lot of them who were involved in this premeditated criminal takeover of the real economy by the fraudsters. But you've seen the quotes out there. You've heard us cover the news. My question is, they're clearly gearing up for a bunch of new wars. The Ayatollah over in Iran is saying brace for war the next 2 weeks. I don't know if that's the case, but these are going from war drums to al-Qaeda proxy armies attacking. I want to get into all of that with Max Keiser, but let's go over a bunch of financial issues here after we finish up on this question, because I want to get into HSBC and the drug running and the al-Qaeda. I mean, that's all over the news, just all of it. That's the thing about corruption, folks, is they always push the envelope, and it automatically will then sink to the most horrible thing you can imagine. Just like all over the U.S., they're saying you can't have water fall in your own garden now. We're going to arrest you 30 days in jail. That was in the news this week. All over, they're taking houses that are totally paid for. I mean, forget just triple selling the deed. They don't care if confidence is destroyed. They're converting it to prisons and checkpoints, and if you're in the in crowd, your house doesn't get taken, or you're allowed to travel. I mean, they really want a 1984 world where these globalists are offshore, they're tax exempt, they've written the laws, they pay little or no taxes, and they can just get away with anything. The problem is in the bravada, hubris, chutzpah, fueled madness of these people, they're trying to start wars now with Russia, who's wildly corrupt and has its own problems, but is not, this brand of insanity. And, of course, they're infiltrated as well. This is a scientific, fraudulent takeover that Max was talking about, where they have created over 1,000 trillion of garbage, gotten governments to sign on to it, and they lecture us all day that it's our taxes, they have to pay this off, and then they raise the taxes knowing good and well it's going to implode the economy,